Mafia boss caught his maid studying late at night. What he did next changed her life. The estate was a fortress of glass and cold white stone, perched on the highest hill overlooking Ravenwood. It was a monument to power, and to its owner, Luca Moretti. To Elena Rosas, it was a prison that paid her bills. At 22, she was one of its many ghosts, a live-in maid who had perfected the art of being invisible. She swept marble floors that mirrored the sky, dusted furniture that cost more than she would ever make in a lifetime, and washed linens that smelled of expensive, floral-scented emptiness. Her life belonged to the house from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, but the hours after, those belonged to her. Her shift was over. She had collected the last of the damp napkins from the dining room, where Mr. Moretti had hosted a late, silent dinner with 3 men who never smiled. She had run the dishwasher, its hum a comforting drone in the cavernous kitchen. Now, she made her way down the back stairs, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the worn wooden steps leading to the basement. The laundry room was her sanctuary. It was warm, humid, and smelled sharply of bleach and industrial-strength detergent. It was the one place no one ever came after midnight. Tucked behind a rusted metal shelving unit, beneath a pile of discarded cleaning rags, was her secret. A thick, heavy textbook with a cracked spine, Fundamentals of Nursing. Elena pulled it out, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. She sat on a low wooden stool, pulling her knees up and balancing the book on her lap. She clicked on a small, battery-powered reading light, a weak circle of yellow in the dim room. For 7 years, ever since she'd been orphaned at 15, this was all she had. She'd bounced from one dead-end job to another, saving every spare dollar, starving herself some weeks, all for this, all for a dream that felt absurd in a place like this, to be a nurse, to heal in a world that seemed built only to break. She turned to the chapter on intravenous therapy. The diagrams of veins and arteries were a map to a different universe. She read the words aloud, her voice a barely audible whisper, trying to make the Latin terms stick in her mind. Median cubital vein, basilic vein, cephalic vein. She was so lost in the intricate pathways of the human arm that she didn't hear the heavy front door of the estate slide open and shut, 3 floors above her. She didn't hear the single set of footsteps, heavy and uneven, crossing the marble foyer. Luca Moretti moved through his cold home like a shadow. The deal at the shipyard had gone wrong. Not disastrously wrong, but violently wrong. One of his men was in a private clinic, and 2 of the Albrini family's men were in the river. He was weary, the cold rage that always followed a betrayal settling deep in his bones. His left side throbbed, a sharp, wet heat beneath his tailored suit jacket. A stray piece of shrapnel from a ricochet had torn through the fabric and into the flesh above his hip. It was messy, but not deep. He wanted whiskey, the good kind, the one he kept in the small, temperature-controlled wine cellar, and to get there, he had to pass the laundry room. He stopped. A light, a tiny, pathetic glow from under the door. His hand went to the pistol holstered at the small of his back, a movement as natural as breathing. He wasn't in the mood for surprises. He pushed the door open. Elena didn't even have time to look up. The book was knocked from her lap as she scrambled to her feet, the stool toppling over and clattering against the concrete floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. She stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "Mr. Moretti." He filled the doorway. He was a tall man, built with a solid, compact power that seemed to suck all the air from the room. His dark hair was damp, and his eyes, usually a flat, unreadable black, were narrowed with pain and something else, something dangerous. She could smell the night on him, cold air, expensive cologne, and something metallic and sharp, blood. Her mind emptied of everything but pure, paralyzing terror. This was it. She was caught stealing time, stealing electricity, hiding in this house. For a man like Luca Moretti, any secret was a betrayal. She wasn't just going to be fired. Her throat closed. The stories the other staff whispered about what happened to people who displeased him. They weren't just stories. His gaze flickered from her terrified face to the overturned stool and then to the book lying open on the floor. He took a step into the room, his limp barely perceptible. He nudged the book with the toe of his polished Italian shoe. "What is this?" His voice was a low gravel, rougher than usual. I was folding, Mr. Moretti. I finished the linens." The lie was stupid, pathetic. The book was right there. He ignored it. He leaned down, wincing as the movement pulled at his side, and picked up the book. He read the title, his expression unmoving. He held it out to her. "What?" he repeated. "Is this?" She stared at the book, then at his face. The gig was up. The terror was so absolute it burned away the lies, leaving only a raw, hopeless truth. "It's my book," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm studying." His stillness was more terrifying than any rage. "Studying what?" "Nursing. I want to be a nurse." She said it. The ridiculous, impossible confession hung in the air between them, smelling of bleach and blood. She waited for him to laugh, to sneer, to call her a stupid girl with dreams too big for a maid. She waited for him to tell her to pack her bags, to have one of his guards escort her off the property, or worse. Luca Moretti just looked at her. He looked at her worn-out uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, the raw determination in her face that was so fierce it looked like fear. He saw the book. He saw the dream, and it cut through the cold fog of his own violence for a single, sharp second. It reminded him of something, someone, a long time ago. He gave a single, curt nod. He dropped the book onto a stack of folded towels. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing up the basement stairs, leaving her alone in the sudden, deafening silence. Elena sank to the floor, her legs giving out. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally let out the sob she'd been holding. It was over. She had lost her job, her room, her only means of survival. She was back to nothing. She was heartbroken, not just for the loss of the job, but for the shame. He had seen her tiny, secret dream, and he hadn't even dignified it with a response. He had just left. She didn't sleep. She went to her small attic room and packed her single duffel bag with her few clothes and her textbooks. She waited for the 5 a.m. knock from the head of security. It never came. At 5:30, trembling with exhaustion, she went down to the kitchen to start the coffee, expecting to be intercepted by Mrs. Davies, the head housekeeper. Instead, she found Maria, the cook, already at the stove. Maria looked at her with a strange, curious expression. "You're late," Maria said, but there was no heat in it. "But it doesn't matter. Mr. Moretti's driver was here." Elena's blood ran cold. "Drop this off for you." Maria nodded toward the massive stainless steel counter. "And he said to tell you, Mr. Moretti has given you the day off." Elena stared. Sitting on the counter was a crisp brown paper package, tied with twine, her name. Elena was written on it in a sharp, black script. "A day off?" she repeated, her voice hollow. "That's what the man said. Don't look at me." "I've never heard of him giving anyone a day off." Maria turned back to her sizzling bacon, clearly dismissing her. Elena took the package. It was heavy. She carried it back up the 3 flights of stairs to her tiny room and sat on the edge of her narrow cot. Her bag, packed with her life's possessions, sat by the door. Her hands shook as she untied the twine. She tore the paper away. It was a book, not her old, battered copy, but a brand new, hardcover textbook. Gray's Anatomy for Students, 4th edition. It was pristine. The pages were glossy, the diagrams sharp and colorful. It must have cost hundreds of dollars. A wave of nausea hit her. This was not a gift. This was a transaction. This was worse than being fired. This was a claim. Men like Luca Moretti didn't do kindness. They invested, they bought, they owned. Elena had been orphaned long enough to know the brutal currency of favors. A man gives a poor girl a gift she can't afford, and he expects a payment she can't refuse. She felt sick. He was playing with her. He'd seen her pathetic little dream and decided to fund it for his own amusement. Was this what it was like? Was this the first step to becoming a kept woman? A pretty little pet for the boss? The thought made her skin crawl. She was a pawn. He was reminding her that he owned this house and everyone and everything in it, including her. She spent the day in her room, a prisoner of her supposed freedom. The new book sat on her dresser, radiating a quiet menace. She was too afraid to open it and too afraid to leave it. Every footstep in the hall made her jump. The sun set, night came. She was expected back on duty at 7 p.m. She put on her uniform, her face pale, and went downstairs. She avoided the basement. She dusted the silent library, polished the silver in the dining room, and waited for the other shoe to drop. At 10 p.m., one of his personal guards, a man named Marco whose face looked like it was carved from stone, found her in the main hall. "He wants to see you," Marco said, not meeting her eyes. "His office. Now." This was it. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. She nodded, her throat too dry to speak. She walked up the sweeping main staircase, each step an agony. The door to his office was thick, dark oak, and it was slightly ajar. She raised a trembling hand and knocked. "Enter." She pushed the door open. The room was vast and dark, lit only by the green glow of a banker's lamp on his massive desk. The curtains were drawn, the smell of whiskey and old leather hung in the air. Luca Moretti was not at his desk. He was standing by the window, his back to her. He had his jacket off, and his white button-down shirt was untucked. "Mr. Moretti?" He turned. His face was tight with a pain he was barely concealing. "You got the book?" It wasn't a question. "Yes. Thank you, sir." "But I can't. You want to be a nurse?" He cut her off, his voice flat. He walked toward the desk, and she saw him wince. He gestured to his chair. "You know how to clean a wound." Elena looked at his desk. A metal first aid kit sat open. Next to it was a bloody rag. "Sir, last night," he said, impatient. It reopened. He turned slightly, pulling up the side of his shirt. A thick white gauze pad was taped above his hip, but it was soaked through with fresh, dark blood. "I don't like doctors," he said, his voice low and hard. "They come in my house. They talk. They ask questions. You're already here." Elena's mind reeled. He was asking her. "Mr. Moretti, I'm not a nurse. I've only read books. I don't know." "You know more than Marco." He sat down heavily in his leather chair, the springs groaning. "Clean it and stitch it if it needs it." "Stitch it," she squeaked. "I can't. I wouldn't know how." "Then clean it," he bit out, his patience snapping. "And tell me if I need to burn it closed. Just handle it." He was testing her. But it was more than that. He was looking at her with a raw, unguarded intensity. He was wounded, and for some reason, he had chosen her. He was trusting her, not her skill. She had none. He was trusting her silence, her gentleness. Her terror was suddenly replaced by a different kind of panic, the panic of responsibility. She approached the desk as if it were a sleeping animal. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists. The kit," she stammered, pointing. He pushed it toward her with one hand. "Go on." She opened it. Antiseptic, gauze, butterfly closures, suture needle and thread still in its sterile package. She swallowed hard, ignoring the needle. I need to..." She gestured to his shirt. He didn't move, just watched her face, that unreadable, intense stare. He was studying her. He unbuttoned his shirt, his own movements stiff, and pushed the fabric aside. The wound was raw and angry, a 3-inch gash that had been poorly cleaned. It was oozing. The first moment of physical closeness was a jolt, sharp and electric. She had to lean over him. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Her fingers, cold with fear, brushed his abdomen as she tried to peel back the old, bloody tape. "Stop shaking," he murmured. "It wasn't an order this time. It was quieter. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'll hurt you." "I've been hurt worse," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Be still." She took a breath. She poured the antiseptic onto a clean gauze pad. She pressed it to the wound. He hissed. A sharp intake of breath, his entire body tensing, but he didn't move. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, dabbing at the raw flesh, her touch as light as she could make it. Her entire universe shrank to that small, violent injury. The smell of the whiskey on his breath, the heat of his skin, the dark, dangerous reality of what she was doing. She was tending to a wound that was almost certainly given to him while he was committing a crime, and he was letting her. She worked in silence, her fear giving way to a strange, sharp focus. She cleaned the blood away, her movements becoming more steady, more sure. He watched her the entire time. He watched the way she bit her lip in concentration, the way her brow furrowed. It's not deep enough for stitches," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly professional. "But it needs to be closed." She picked up the small butterfly bandages. She leaned in closer, her hair brushing his shoulder. She could feel his breath on her temple. Her hands were steady now. She carefully, meticulously, pulled the edges of the wound together, securing them with 3 of the closures. He didn't flinch, he just watched. When she was done, she taped a thick, clean square of gauze over the spot. She pulled her hands back slowly. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luca looked at the bandage, then back at her face. He was so close she could see the flecks of brown in his dark eyes. He took a long, slow time to answer. "For now," he said, his voice soft. "Go." Elena backed away from the desk, her heart pounding a heavy, suffocating rhythm. She turned and walked out of the office, pulling the door shut behind her. She didn't run this time. She walked, her back straight, her hands trembling again. She didn't know what she was to him, a pawn, a pet, a maid, but as she touched her own cheek, feeling the heat where his breath had been, she knew one thing: she was no longer invisible. The change was not spoken, it was simply executed. Mrs. Davies, the head housekeeper, no longer handed Elena the same list of chores as the other maids. One day, she was scrubbing the main hall alongside Clara and 2 other girls. The next, she was told, in clipped, formal tones, that her duties had been reassigned. She was now responsible for the West Wing, exclusively. The West Wing was Luca Moretti's private domain. It housed his office, his vast, silent library, and a series of high-ceilinged guest suites that were almost never used. Her new routine was solitary. She spent her mornings dusting shelves of leather-bound books that no one read, her afternoons polishing the dark, heavy furniture in his office, always finishing before he returned in the evening. One of the guest suites, the one directly adjacent to his own bedroom, was left unlocked. Inside, where a chaise lounge had once been, a large mahogany desk now stood, facing the window. It had not been there a week ago. On its polished surface was a new, high-intensity desk lamp, the kind an architect might use. Elena understood. This was her new laundry room. This was her new, sanctioned place to study. The books began to appear. Every few days, another brown paper package would be left on the desk. Pathophysiology, a manual of surgical procedures, pharmacology for nurses. They were volumes she could never have afforded, not in a dozen lifetimes. There was never a note. There was never a word from him. He had simply observed her desire and, in his cold, absolute way, had taken control of it. But the gifts did not feel like kindness. They felt like an invoice. Each new textbook was another link in a chain, pulling her deeper into his orbit, separating her from the life she understood. The other staff, once indifferent, now watched her with a mixture of fear and sharp, jealous resentment. Her new chores isolated her. She no longer ate in the bustling, noisy staff kitchen. The whispers would stop the moment she walked in, only to resume in a hostile buzz the second she turned her back. She took her meals in her small attic room, alone. She was a ghost of a different kind now. Not invisible, but marked. The inevitable confrontation happened on a Tuesday. In the main floor linen closet, Elena had been sent to fetch fresh towels for the West Wing bathroom. She was pulling the heavy, folded cotton sheets from a shelf when Clara, another maid who had been at the estate for 3 years, stepped into the doorway, blocking the light. Well, Clara said, her voice dripping with a saccharine malice. If it isn't the princess— Elena flinched, clutching the towels to her chest. Excuse me, Clara, I need to get by. Oh, I'm sure you do. Busy, so many important things to do. Polishing his desk, or is it him you're polishing? A hot, sick feeling rose in Elena's throat. I don't know what you're talking about. Clara let out a short, ugly laugh. Don't you? You think we're all stupid? You get a day off. You get packages delivered. You're the only one allowed in the West Wing. We all know how a girl like you gets ahead in a house like this. Clara stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. So tell me, what's it like? Is he a gentle lover? Or does he like it rough? I always wondered. It's not like that, Elena said, her voice shaking with a sudden, hot rage. It's not. He's letting me study. Study? Clara scoffed, the word a curse. Is that what they're calling it now? Don't you dare pretend you're better than us. You're just a whore who was smart enough to get caught in the right room at the right time. The word struck Elena like a physical blow. She recoiled, her face ashen. She couldn't breathe. Without a word, she pushed past Clara, shoving her shoulder hard, and fled down the hall, the heavy towels dropping to the marble floor behind her. She didn't stop until she was in the West Wing guest room, the door locked behind her. She sank to the floor, her back against the cool, solid wood. Whore, the word echoed, ugly and sharp. It was the one thing she had spent her entire life trying not to be. She was poor. She was an orphan, but she was clean. She was good. Now, Luca Moretti, with his silent gifts and his cold, possessive changes to her life, had made her into something dirty. From that moment, Elena retreated. She didn't just hide from the staff, she hid from him. She did her work with a frantic, terrified efficiency, disappearing from his office minutes before he was due to arrive. She memorized the sound of his car, the sound of his footsteps in the hall. If he entered the library while she was there, she would find a reason to be in the farthest, darkest stack, her head down, her body turned away. She stopped studying. The beautiful, expensive books sat on the mahogany desk, unopened. The sight of them made her feel sick. She was skittish, a mouse living in the walls of a lion's den, and the lion had noticed. He found her 4 days later. She was in the library, high on a rolling ladder, dusting a row of books on 19th century art. She heard the massive oak doors swing open, but she didn't turn. She just froze, her knuckles white on the dusty spine of a book. Elena! His voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous, silent room. She didn't answer. She just squeezed her eyes shut. Look at me. She couldn't. She began to wipe the book in her hand with her cloth, her movements jerky and small. I said, he repeated, his voice closer now, hard as iron. Look at me. She flinched as she heard the metallic scrape of the ladder's wheels on the floor. He was at the bottom. He was holding it. She was trapped, slowly, her heart hammering a painful, suffocating rhythm. She looked down. He stood directly below her, his hand on the ladder, staring up at her. His face was cold. His dark eyes narrowed in a way that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with anger. You are avoiding me, he stated. It was not a question. You are skittish. You look at me like I'm a stranger. Why? She stared at him, her chest tight, the injustice of it, the shame from Clara's words, the suffocating weight of his unspoken expectations. It all boiled over. Why? She whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden, unexpected fury. You're asking me why? I am. The books, she said, her voice gaining a wild, desperate strength. The new room, the new chores. You set me apart from everyone. You made me special. His expression didn't change, but a flicker of confusion entered his eyes. I gave you what you wanted, a place to study, time. You want to be a nurse. No, she cried, and the word was a small explosion. You gave me a cage. You gave me gifts I can't refuse, and you took away my nothing. I had nothing, but at least it was mine. Now, everyone— She stopped, a sob catching in her throat. "Everyone what?" he pressed, his voice dangerously soft. "Say it." The tears came, hot and angry. "Everyone looks at me. They whisper. They know I'm different. They know I'm yours. Do you have any idea what they're calling me?" He just watched her, his face a mask of cold impatience. "Tell me," he commanded. "They're calling me your whore," she screamed, the word ripping out of her. "That's what they're saying. That's what you've made me look like." He moved so fast she didn't have time to gasp. His hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a touch. It was a capture. His fingers were a steel vice, and he yanked, not hard enough to pull her off the ladder, but with a sharp, brutal force that sent a jolt of pain and terror through her arm. "You will not," he growled, his face dark with a sudden, violent fury. "Use that word, not in my house, not about you." But as he stared up at her, he saw her face. It wasn't defiant, it was broken. He saw the genuine, agonizing shame in her eyes. And her words, "What you've made me look like," echoed in the silent room. The realization hit him. He'd been strategic. He had been almost kind in his own way. He'd given her tools. He'd given her protection, solitude, and in doing so, he had painted a target on her back. He had made her a pariah. He had, in the language of his world, claimed her, and in the language of hers, he had ruined her. His grip on her wrist faltered. The fury in his eyes was replaced by something else, something shaken and raw. He let go of her arm as if it were on fire. He stepped back from the ladder, turning his back on her. The silence in the room was terrible, heavy. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet. "Mr. Moretti," she sobbed, terrified by what she had done. "Get out!" He didn't look at her. He just stared out the tall library window at the dying light. She scrambled down the ladder, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell, and ran from the room. She hid for hours. She didn't go to her attic room. She didn't go to the guest suite. She hid in the one place she knew no one would look, the old laundry room, sitting on the cold floor in the dark, her body shaking with silent sobs. She had yelled at him. She had accused him. She was finished. She was worse than fired. She had made herself a problem. It must have been past 1 a.m. when the terror of what he might do finally outweighed her fear of him. Her head was pounding, her throat raw. She needed water. She crept up the basement stairs and into the cavernous kitchen. She was so sure it would be empty, but he was there. He was sitting at the massive stainless steel island in the near dark, lit only by the pale blue light of the digital clock on the oven. A bottle of amber brandy and a single snifter sat in front of him. He was perfectly still, staring at the wall. Elena froze, her hand flying to her mouth. She tried to back out, but her foot scuffed the tile floor. "Don't," he said. His voice was flat, tired. He didn't turn. He reached for a second glass from a nearby shelf, a clean, small snifter. He poured 2 fingers of the dark liquid into it and pushed it across the steel island, a silent offering, a command. She walked forward as if in a dream, her legs unsteady. She slid onto the stool on the opposite side of the island. It felt like a mile of cold steel separated them. She looked at the glass. She'd never had brandy in her life. She looked at him. His face was unreadable in the shadows. He wasn't looking at her. He was just sitting. The anger from the library was gone. There was just a heavy, suffocating stillness. She took the glass. Her hands were shaking. She took a tiny, hesitant sip. The brandy was fire, a liquid heat that burned a path down her throat and into her stomach. The shock of it made her gasp, but it steadied her. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the industrial refrigerator. He swirled the brandy in his glass, the small movement seeming unnaturally loud. Finally, his eyes lifted. He looked at her. His gaze was heavy, stripped of all its usual guards. It was just raw. He was looking at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. A single, stupid tear she didn't even know was coming slipped from her eye and traced a cold path down her cheek. He moved. Not fast, not angry. He moved with a slow, deliberate stillness that was more terrifying than his rage. He leaned across the island, bridging the distance between them. His hand came up, his thumb, calloused and rough from things she didn't want to imagine, touched her skin. It was impossibly gentle. He brushed the tear from her jawline. The touch was a shock. It was the first time he had ever touched her with anything that resembled tenderness. It sent a jolt, sharp and electric. Straight to her core, she flinched. A full-body recoil, an instinct born of years of being alone and unprotected. Danger, do not trust, do not lean in. He stopped. His hand hovered an inch from her face. He didn't retreat, he didn't push, he just waited. And in that small, infinite pause, she saw him. He wasn't demanding, he wasn't taking, he was watching her, and he was waiting for her to make a choice. She did. She leaned back in. It was a tiny movement, just an inch, but it was everything. Her cheek pressed back against the rough warmth of his thumb. His eyes closed for a fraction of a second. A breath he seemed to have been holding shuddered out of him. He leaned in further. His other hand came up, slow and hesitant, to cup the side of her face. His palm was so warm it felt like it was branding her. She could smell the brandy on his breath, sharp and sweet, and then his mouth was on hers. It wasn't a soft kiss. It wasn't violent. It was tentative. It was clumsy and searching and full of a million questions. His lips were firm, chapped, and tasted of brandy and a deep, aching loneliness she recognized in herself. She didn't know what to do. Her hands were on her lap. She just stayed still, her lips parting slightly under the gentle, uncertain pressure. A spark ignited, something deep and hot in the pit of her stomach. His thumb stroked her cheek, a slow, hypnotic movement. She lifted one of her trembling hands and rested it on his wrist. The skin was hot, the pulse beneath it strong and steady. The kiss deepened. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a low rumble in his chest. He shifted, and his mouth moved over hers with a sudden, desperate hunger. And just as she felt herself begin to respond, to lean into the heat, he broke it. He pulled back, his breathing ragged. He stood up from the stool so fast it scraped loudly against the floor. He stared at her, his eyes wide and dark, his lips parted. Elena stared back, her mouth tingling, her entire body alive and trembling. He started. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of such profound uncertainty it shocked her. He looked away. "I apologize." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy and fast, leaving her alone in the blue light with 2 glasses, a half-empty bottle of brandy, and a heart that was pounding so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. She didn't sleep that night. She went to the guest room, the one he had given her, and sat at the mahogany desk. She stared at the unopened textbooks. She touched her lips. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. He was Luca Moretti. He was a killer. He was the most dangerous man in Ravenwood, but the confusion was a storm. He had grabbed her. He had yelled at her. And then he had touched her like she was made of glass. He had kissed her, and he had apologized for it. And then there was the desire. A sharp, undeniable, terrifying pull. The way his hand had felt on her skin. The heat of his mouth. It was the first warmth she had felt in a lifetime of cold. And she was terrified. She was afraid of him. And she was, even more, afraid that she was starting to want him. The kiss was a ghost. It haunted the space between them. For 3 days, Elena and Luca Moretti moved through the estate like 2 magnets repelling each other. He didn't call her to his office. She finished her duties in the West Wing with a frantic, quiet efficiency, gone hours before he returned. The air in the house was thick, charged with the unspoken, the taste of brandy, and his sudden, shocking apology. Elena felt like a plucked string, vibrating with a tension that had nowhere to go. She was trapped, not by him, but by her own confusion. The fear she had lived with for so long was now horribly tangled with a new, sharp and terrifying warmth. She had to get out. She had been inside the stone walls of the compound for weeks. The isolation, once a buffer against the staff, was now a suffocating blanket. She needed to walk on a public sidewalk. She needed to see people who were not guards, people whose faces were not set in stone. She realized with a pathetic, desperate pang, a bar of cheap drugstore chocolate. Her day off had never been officially rescinded. She waited until mid-morning, a time when the estate was in a lull. Luca was gone, his black sedan having swept down the drive hours earlier. She pulled her hair back, put on the simple jeans and sweater she'd arrived in, and slipped out the kitchen's utility door. The air of Ravenwood was cool and smelled of exhaust. It was wonderful. She walked the 6 blocks to the small, gritty corner store, her head down, her hands in her pockets. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was just a girl, just a nobody. The freedom was so sharp it almost hurt. She was halfway down the 3rd block when she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck, the distinct predatory hum of being watched. She didn't turn around. She kept walking, but her senses screamed. The sidewalk, moments before populated with strangers, suddenly felt empty, isolating. She chanced to look at a car's dark, tinted window. 2 men. They were walking half a block behind her. They weren't in uniforms. They wore cheap suits, their posture lazy, but their pace was locked to hers. Panic, cold and acidic, flooded her stomach. She sped up, her heart hammering. They sped up. She was 2 doors from the corner store. She broke into a jog, fumbling for the door, and plunged inside. The small bell above the door jingled, a bright, cheerful sound that was a mockery of her terror. The store was narrow, cramped, and smelled of stale coffee and incense. An old man sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. Elena hurried down an aisle, grabbing a bottle of water she didn't want, her hands shaking. She needed to calm down. She was being paranoid. They were just 2 men walking. The bell jingled again. She froze. Through the gaps in the brightly colored chip bags, she saw them, the 2 men. They separated, one ambling toward the refrigerated section, the other walking, far too slowly, down her aisle. "Looking for something?" the man asked. He was close now. He smelled of beer and old sweat. Elena shook her head, edging backward. Just leaving." "In a hurry?" He smiled, and the expression was all wrong, a predatory baring of teeth. "You look familiar. You one of Moretti's girls?" She turned to flee, but the man moved. His hand shot out, and he grabbed her. His fingers clamped around her upper arm like a steel trap. "Hey, not so fast. We just want to talk." Elena cried out, a small, strangled sound, twisting in his grip. She dropped the water bottle, which hit the linoleum floor with a dull crack. "Let me go, please." She said to let her go. The voice was not the shopkeeper's. It was flat, cold, and right behind her. The man holding her barely had time to turn. Marco, Luca's stone-faced head of security, was standing 2 feet away. He hadn't entered through the front door. He must have been in the back of the store, waiting. The second man, by the refrigerators, saw him, and his hand darted inside his jacket. But before he could pull anything, another of Luca's men, one Elena didn't even know, emerged from the back office and slammed a fist into the man's kidneys. The man grunted, folding. The man holding Elena tried to pull her in front of him, to use her as a shield, but Marco was too fast. He didn't go for a weapon. His hand chopped down on the man's wrist, a sharp, brutal strike that must have broken bone. The man screamed, his grip releasing. As he recoiled, Marco stepped in, driving his other hand palm heel first, into the man's throat. The sound was a wet, sickening thud. The man didn't make another noise. He just collapsed, his eyes wide, his hands clawing at his crushed windpipe. The other man was already on the floor, his face being introduced to the shelving with a series of quick, efficient impacts. It was over in less than 5 seconds. It was silent, brutal, and terrifyingly professional. The old shopkeeper was staring, his newspaper crumpled in his hands, his face the color of ash. Marco looked at him, his expression completely flat. He fell. He then turned to Elena. She was pressed against the shelf, her whole body shaking so violently she couldn't stand. She was crying, hyperventilating. Marco didn't comfort her. He didn't ask if she was all right. He just took her arm, the same one the man had grabbed, his grip firm and impersonal. "We're leaving. Now." He pulled her through the store, past the two unmoving bodies, and into the back office. He shoved her through a rear exit into a dark, narrow alley where a black sedan was idling, its engine a low, threatening growl. He pushed her into the back seat and climbed in after her. The drive back to the estate was silent. Elena huddled against the door, as far from Marco as she could get, and sobbed into her hands. The normalcy of the sidewalk, the dream of freedom. It was all a joke. She wasn't just in Luca's house, she was in his world, and his world had just followed her to the corner store. When the car pulled up the long drive, Luca was waiting. He wasn't in the doorway. He was standing on the bottom step of the grand entrance, as if he'd been carved from the same cold white stone as the house. His face was a mask of such contained fury that it was more terrifying than any shouting. The moment the car stopped, he tore the back door open. He saw Elena, her face pale and streaked with tears, and his fury seemed to congeal, to harden. He didn't look at her. He looked at Marco. "You let them get that close," he said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "You let them touch her. Boss, they were Albrini. We didn't want to move until... I don't care." Luca cut him off. He reached into the car and grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her out. His grip was bruising, his hand like a manacle. He didn't stop. He dragged her up the steps and into the marble foyer. "Sir, you're hurting me," she cried. He didn't seem to hear her. He pulled her all the way to his office and kicked the door shut behind them. "What did they say to you?" he demanded. "Nothing. They just asked if I was..." "What?" He slammed his hand on his desk. The sound made her jump. "Tell me. They asked if I was one of your girls," she sobbed. They said you send your prettiest things out alone, and then they grabbed me." Luca turned away, a strangled sound of pure rage tearing from his throat. He wasn't angry at her. She realized it with a cold, sinking horror. He was furious at himself. The attack was his fault. "He targeted you," Luca said, his back to her. He was staring out the window, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "He targeted you. Because you are here. Because you are under my roof." Elena felt the floor tilt. They were using me to get to you. They think you're my weakness," he spat, as if the word was poison. "They think you're a leverage point, a toy, something I value." He turned to face her, his eyes black and burning. "And I let them think it. I let you walk right out that door." I didn't know," she whispered. "I just wanted some air." "You don't get air," he roared, stepping toward her. "Not anymore. You don't get to walk to a corner store. You don't get to be a normal girl. That life is over." He pointed a finger at her. "From this moment, you do not leave the compound. You do not step 1 foot outside that gate without Marco. You need something, you tell me. You tell Maria. Someone will fetch it. You are not to go outside. Ever. Do you understand me?" The terror from the store was gone, replaced by a sudden, hot and wild wave of defiance. The tears dried on her face. "No." He stopped. The word hung in the air. He looked at her as if she'd just slapped him. "What did you say?" "No," she repeated, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I won't. I can't. I'm not yours. You don't get to lock me up." "Lock you up?" He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "This is for your protection. Or did you enjoy yourself out there? Do you want them to finish the job?" "I don't care," she screamed, and the sound was raw, ripped from the deepest part of her. "I'd rather be out there and have it be my choice. You took me from the laundry room. You gave me these books. You made me this. This thing in your house. I'm not your maid. I'm not your lover. I'm not your student. I'm a prisoner. You're turning me into a prisoner." She was sobbing now. Great. Heaving, angry sobs. I won't be your thing in a cage." He stood there and took it. He watched her break, his face unmoving, his chest rising and falling. The anger in his eyes was gone. replaced by something deep and weary, a profound, aching exhaustion. He waited until her sobs quieted into ragged breaths. "Prisoner," he said, his voice quiet, rough. "You think this is what I want?" He walked to the window, the fight gone out of him. "There was someone before? Years ago. She was young, she was family, and she didn't understand the rules. She thought I could protect her from everything. She thought she was safe, and I thought she was safe, too." He paused, his jaw working. "I put her under my roof, just like you." Elena watched him, her anger dissolving into a cold dread. "The Albrinis, the same family who sent those men today, they got to her, here, in this house. Not because they were strong, but because I was weak. One of my own men. Someone I trusted with my life. He betrayed me. He let them in the gate. For money." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were hollow. "She died. Right on the floor in the main hall. So, yes, Elena, you will stay here. You will be a prisoner. You will hate me for it. But you will be alive, because I will not bury anyone else." The confession silenced her. The raw, unhealed grief in his voice was a physical thing in the room, pushing all the air out. This wasn't about control. It was about terror. His terror, that night. She was in the guest suite, staring at a page on surgical sterilization, but the words were just black marks. She'd not eaten. She'd not moved in hours. A soft knock came at her door. She tensed. He never knocked. He was the owner. He just entered. She opened it. He was standing there, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up his forearms. He looked lost. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't the monster. He was just Luca. "Come with me," he said. His voice was low. She followed him, her stockinged feet silent on the thick carpet. He didn't take her to the office or the library. He led her into his own bedroom. The room was Spartan, dominated by a massive unmade bed. It smelled like him, that scent of expensive cologne, soap, and something metallic. He walked to his nightstand. He picked up a simple, tarnished silver frame. He held it out to her. It was a photograph, old and slightly faded. A young man, a version of Luca from a decade ago, stood with his arm around a smiling, dark-haired girl. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt and her hair was in a messy ponytail. She looked bright, happy, and vibrantly alive. "This was her," he said, his voice thick. "My sister, Sophia." Elena looked from the photo to his face. "She was 19, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He was talking to the photo, not to her. She wanted to be a nurse. She had books all over her room, anatomy, biology. She was always trying to patch up my men after a fight. She thought she could save everyone." Elena's breath caught. She wanted to be a nurse. "She was killed in a turf war," he said, the words flat and dead. "My turf war. She was the price I paid." Elena finally understood. The laundry room, the books, the wound. He hadn't seen a maid. He had seen a ghost. His protection wasn't about owning her. It was about atoning for Sophia. She looked at him, at this dangerous, broken, haunted man, and the last of her fear melted away, replaced by a sudden, aching wave of empathy. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it gently on his, covering his fingers where they gripped the frame. "Luca," she whispered, the first time she had ever used his name. "I'm so sorry." His eyes snapped to hers. The grief was so raw, so open. She felt she could fall into it. He let out a ragged breath. He set the photo down, but he didn't let go of her hand. He turned his, lacing his fingers with hers. He leaned in, his body shaking, just slightly. He didn't kiss her. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. He just breathed her in, as if she were air, as if he'd been drowning. This time, she didn't pull back. She didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid. She lifted her other hand and laid it flat against his chest, over his heart. It was pounding, a heavy, frantic beat, a mirror of her own. He let go of her hand and his arms came up, sliding around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He wasn't grabbing. He was holding. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, his breath hot against her skin. I can't I can't lose you, too, he murmured, his voice muffled against her. A jolt went through her, hot and liquid. He kissed her neck, a slow, desperate, searching pressure. His lips were warm, his stubble scratching her skin. It wasn't a prelude to passion, it was a plea for an anchor. He kissed her again, just below her ear, and a sound, half sob, half groan, rumbled in his chest. She leaned into him, her head falling back, her fingers clenching the fabric of his shirt. Their breathing was unsteady, the air thick with grief and something new, something electric and aching. He was trembling, she was trembling, and then, with a sharp, shuddering breath, he pulled back. He didn't pull away completely. He just moved back enough to look at her, his hand still gripping her waist, hers still on his chest. His eyes were dark, pained, and full of a want so fierce it terrified them both. Not, he said, his voice ragged, not like this. He wasn't ready. He couldn't mix his grief for his sister with this raw, fragile thing that was growing between them. He let her go, one hand at a time, and took a step back. The space between them was cold, but it was electric, thrumming with what had almost happened and what was, inevitably, going to. The truce was a thin, fragile layer of ice over a dark, churning ocean. The night Luca had confessed his sister's story, he had laid bare the wounded man beneath the monster, and in doing so, he had recalibrated their world. Elena was no longer just the maid, and he was no longer just the boss. They were two people, bound by a shared, haunted space. He did not apologize for the almost kiss, and she did not acknowledge it, but it was there, in every loaded silence, in every accidental brush of hands as she served his coffee. He watched her. She pretended not to notice, but she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch, a constant, low-grade fever. This fragile quiet was shattered 4 days later. It arrived in a simple, white butcher's box, left on the top step of the estate. It was found by Marco, who, after a quick scan, immediately cleared the grounds. Luca opened it in his office. Elena, who had been dusting the bookshelves, froze at the door, her hand on the knob, about to leave. She saw him lift the lid. She saw his shoulders go rigid. "Get out, Elena," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She didn't move. "What is it? Get out!" He turned, and she saw his face. It was not anger. It was a cold, white, absolute absence of emotion that was far more terrifying. In his hand, he held a single, dead raven. Tied to its leg with a red ribbon was a small, rolled piece of parchment. He unrolled it. He read the 3 words. His hand, a hand she had seen lift a 200-pound man, began to shake. He looked at her, his eyes black pits. "They know your name." He didn't need to say anything else. The Albrinis had sent their reply. The message was not for his men. It was not about his business. It was for him, and it was about her. The girl dies next. The escalation was immediate. The estate went into lockdown. The number of guards on the perimeter doubled. Black sedans, once hidden, now sat visible at the foot of the long driveway. The house, once a cold, quiet monument, now thrummed with the low, menacing energy of a fortress preparing for siege. Elena was moved that afternoon. She was packing her few belongings in her small attic room when Marco appeared at the door. He didn't knock. "Mr. Moretti has given you new quarters," he said, his face as impassive as ever. "Bring your things." "New quarters? But it's not a request." He picked up her duffel bag as if it weighed nothing. She followed him out of the servants' wing, down the main staircase, and into the west wing. He walked past the guest room she had been using, the one with the desk. He stopped at the suite directly beside Luca's own bedroom. He pushed the door open. It was not a maid's room. It was a full suite. A sitting area, a fireplace, a king-size bed, but its most important feature, she saw with a cold chill, was the thick, solid oak door that, if unlocked, would connect her room directly to Luca's. "You will stay here," Marco said. "You will not leave the west wing without my clearance. All your meals will be brought to you. I have my duties," she stammered, the reality of her new prison crashing down on her. "Your duties have changed." He left, closing the door with a quiet, definitive click. She was no longer a maid. She was precious cargo. She was a liability. She was a target. For 2 days, she was utterly, maddeningly alone. She paced the beautiful, carpeted cage, her textbook sitting unopened on the antique desk. She was safe. She was also trapped. On the 3rd night, she couldn't stand it. The silence was too loud. She needed to do something, anything other than think about the men who were coming for her. She opened the connecting door to Luca's room. It was empty, his bed neatly made. She crept through it, her heart pounding, and into his office. He was there, sitting at his desk, his back to her, staring at a wall of security monitors. "I told you to stay in your room," he said without turning. "I can't," she whispered. "I'll go insane. Please, let me just do something. Let me clean. Let me organize your desk." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the mountain of paperwork, the overflowing ashtray, the half-empty bottle of whiskey. He was exhausted. The siege was wearing on him. "My wound," he said, his voice rough. "It's healing, but it itches." It was an offering, a test. She came forward into the small circle of lamplight. "Let me see." He leaned back in his chair, pulling up the side of his shirt. The gash that had once been raw and angry was now a puckered, red-purple scar, healing cleanly. "It looks good," she said, her voice softening. Her fingers, almost of their own accord, traced the raised skin. It was the first time she had touched him voluntarily, not in fear, not in passion, but with simple, clinical care. The itching is normal. It means the nerves are mending. He watched her face as she examined him. Good. Her gaze drifted from the scar to his desk. The first aid kit was still there. Open, a mess of discarded wrappers and gauze. "You should keep this sterile. Luca, this is all... It's a mess. This antiseptic is expired." He looked at the kit, then at her. A new, strange idea was forming in his eyes. "Fix it." "What?" "Fix it," he repeated. "We have a supply closet downstairs. Medical supplies. It's a disaster. Marco just throws things in. Go through it. Make a list of what we need, what's expired. Organize it. I want it clean." It was a bridge. He was inviting her, not into his bed, but into his world, using the one skill set she was desperately trying to build. For the next week, Elena had a purpose. The supply closet was, as he'd said, a disaster. But it was more than just first aid. There were bags of IV fluid, boxes of surgical staples, packets of blood-clotting agents. It was a field hospital for a small, private war. She worked for hours, cataloging, cleaning, labeling. She threw out anything that was compromised. She created a clean, sterile, organized system. When she was done, she brought him the new inventory list. He stared at it, impressed. Her handwriting was neat, the columns precise. "You did this. It's like an emergency room. You need to know where everything is. Instantly." He nodded, a slow, appraising look on his face. He picked up a different stack of papers, shipping manifests, schedules, driver rosters. "My last assistant. He wasn't detail-oriented. He was the one who betrayed Sophia." He pushed the stack toward her. "I'm behind. These manifests. They need to be cross-referenced with the driver's logs." "It's tedious." "I can do it," she said, without hesitation. She sat at the small side desk in his office, and just like that, her routine changed. She was no longer his maid. She was his. She was his assistant, his medic, his prisoner, his resident. She worked late into the night, often in the same room as him. They existed in a strange, domestic silence. The only sounds were the scratching of her pen, the click of his keyboard, the heavy thud as he stamped a document. She learned to read his moods. She learned when to bring him fresh coffee without asking. He learned that she was smart, quick, and, like him, tireless. One night, she was so deep in the work she didn't realize the hour. She was cross-referencing a pharmaceutical order with her own nursing textbook, trying to understand what exactly. They were shipping so much of... The words on the page began to blur. The low hum of the office server was a lullaby. She was just so tired. She rested her head on the open pharmacology book. Just for a second, Luca had been on the phone for 2 hours, his voice a low, angry growl, dealing with a problem at the docks. When he finally hung up, the silence of the office was absolute. He rubbed his eyes, the headache from the Albrini pressure a constant, dull throb behind his temples. He stood up, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, and turned. He stopped. Elena was asleep at the side desk. Her head was pillowed on a pile of his ledgers and her thick, open textbook. Her breathing was deep. Even her face softened in a way he never saw when she was awake. She looked young. She looked peaceful. A profound, aching tenderness washed over him, so sharp it stole his breath. It was a dangerous, crippling feeling. He saw Sophia, asleep at the kitchen table, her head on her homework. He saw the girl he had dragged from the laundry room. He saw the woman who had faced him down in this very office, screaming in defiance. And he saw the target the Albrinis wanted to put a bullet in. He moved toward her, his footsteps silent. He looked at the book she was sleeping on, Pharmacology. He gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her cheek. She didn't stir. He couldn't leave her there. It was cold. It was undignified. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She was light, lighter than he'd expected. He lifted her. She murmured in her sleep, a soft, incoherent sound, and her head lolled, her face pressing into the crook of his neck. Her breath was warm against his skin. She instinctively burrowed closer to his warmth. Luca's eyes squeezed shut. The simple, trusting, unconscious movement was a knife in his ribs. He held her for a long moment, just standing in the dark, breathing in the faint, clean scent of her hair. Then, carefully, he carried her from the office. He didn't take her to her new room. He took her to his. He laid her on his bed, on top of the heavy comforter. He pulled her shoes off, his touch gentle, impersonal. He found a thick woolen blanket at the foot of the bed and unfolded it, draping it over her. He should have left. He should have gone to the chair or to the couch in his office, but he couldn't. He sat on the edge of the mattress, a few feet from her, and just watched her. He was her guard. This was his post. He would not fail this one. He would not lose her. She woke slowly, a disoriented drift from a deep, dreamless sleep. She was warm. She was comfortable. And she was not in her chair. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dark. The room was not hers. It was his. She could smell his scent on the pillows. "Luca?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "I'm here." His voice came from the shadows. She pushed herself up on her elbows. He was sitting in the large armchair in the corner, a dark silhouette against the moonlit window. What time is it?" "Almost 4 a.m, he said. "You fell asleep." "In my office." "Oh." She felt a blush creep up her neck. You carried me. You were cold." They sat in the quiet. The tension from the siege, from the house, was outside the door. In here, in the dark. It was just them. "I used to dream," she said, her voice a soft, sleepy murmur, "about what I'd do when I got out." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Out of this house? Out of that life," she clarified. "The one before? The one where I was nobody. I dreamed I'd have a tiny apartment, maybe a small, stupid dog, a boring job at a clinic, where the most exciting thing that happened was the coffee machine breaking." She let out a small, sad laugh. "It seems ridiculous now." "No, it doesn't," he said, his voice rough. "It sounds sane." "What did you dream about?" she asked, bold in the darkness. He was quiet for a long time. "I dreamed I'd take over my father's shipping import business, the legal side. I'd make it the biggest on the East Coast. I dreamed I'd pay for Sophia's college, watch her graduate, get married, that I'd be an uncle." He let out a breath, sharp and bitter. "Dreams get lost." "They're not lost," she whispered. "Just changed. You're still protecting." He looked at her, a shadow moving in the dark. He stood up from the chair. He didn't turn on a light. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, where he had been before. He was so close now she could feel the heat from his body. "Your dream," he said, his voice low. to be a nurse. It's not lost, isn't it? She asked. I'm a prisoner in a mafia war, reading books about saving people. It's a joke. No. He reached out, his hand slow, and tucked her hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed the shell of her ear, and a spark, hot and immediate, shot through her. It's not. His hand didn't move away. It cupped the side of her face. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. A slow, hypnotic, possessive motion. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Elena, he whispered. Her name was an ache. He leaned in. The kiss was not tentative, not searching. It was a claiming. It was a surrender. His mouth was on hers, firm and hot and desperate. He tasted of whiskey and sleeplessness and a deep, profound hunger that she recognized, because it was tearing through her, too. She kissed him back. Her hand came up, not to his wrist, but to his hair, her fingers gripping the thick, dark strands, pulling him closer. This wasn't an apology. This wasn't comfort. This was want. A low groan rumbled in his chest, and he shifted, his weight coming onto the bed, one knee beside her. He pushed her back against the pillows, his mouth never leaving hers. He kissed her like he was starving, his lips moving from her mouth to her jaw, to the soft, frantic pulse in her throat. "Luca," she breathed, her back arching. His hand slid from her face, down her neck, over the simple cotton t-shirt she slept in. He paused at her collarbone, his hand splayed, his palm hot against her skin. Then, with a slow, deliberate purpose, his hand moved down, over her stomach, until it rested low, possessively, on her hip. She was trembling, but not with fear. His other hand found the hem of her shirt, his fingers brushing the bare skin of her stomach. The touch was electric. It was fire. He unbuttoned his own shirt, his movements quick, pulling the fabric free from his pants. He was breathing hard, his mouth coming back to hers. He was heavy on top of her, a solid, grounding, dangerous weight. His skin was hot against hers. He was going to take her, here, in his bed, in the dark, and she was going to let him. And then he stopped. He froze, his mouth hovering an inch from hers. His breathing was a ragged gasp. He was shaking, his whole body rigid with the effort of holding back. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, dazed, her lips swollen from his kiss. "What?" she whispered. "What's wrong?" He pulled back, sitting up. He rolled off the bed, turning his back to her, his hands braced on his knees. He was fighting a war with himself, and it was a war she could not see. "Get up," he growled. "What? Did I do something?" "No," he said, his voice raw. He turned to face her. His shirt was open, his chest rising and falling. His eyes were black with a desire so fierce it was almost violent, but it was tempered by something else, a profound, aching respect. "Not like this," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Not when you're scared, not when you're trapped in my house, not when you look at me like I'm your savior or your jailer." He took a step toward her. "When you come to me, it will not be because you're grateful. It will not be because you're scared. It will not be because you're here." He knelt by the side of the bed, so his face was level with hers. "I will not take another thing from you. Elena, this has to be yours, not mine." He took her hand, his grip tight. "Not until you say yes like you mean it. Not until it's yours." She stared at him. He was offering her the one thing no one else ever had. A choice. He was the most powerful man she knew, and he was giving her all the power. The tears that came to her eyes were not from fear. They were from a release so profound it made her weak. She couldn't give him that yes, not yet. The room was still too dark, the world outside still too loud, but she couldn't bear the cold space he had put between them. "Then don't leave me," she whispered. His fierce expression softened. The fight went out of him. "Don't leave me alone tonight," she repeated, her voice clearer. I'm afraid." He studied her face for a long time, then he nodded. He stood up, walked around to the other side of the massive bed, and pulled back the covers. He took off his shoes, but nothing else. He got in, his back to her. The bed felt vast. The silence was heavy. She lay there, her body thrumming, her heart aching. He was only inches away, but he was a mile apart, a wall of honor and violence she couldn't understand. She couldn't sleep. After an hour of silence, she moved. It was a small, hesitant shift. He didn't move, but his voice was low, awake. "Elena?" She rolled onto her side, facing his broad back. "I'm still cold." He let out a long, slow breath. He rolled onto his back and then onto his side, facing her. In the dim light, she could just make out his features. He opened his arm. It was an invitation. She moved, shifting across the small space, and slid into his hold. She pressed her face against his chest, her arm coming to rest on his waist. He was solid and impossibly warm. His arm came around her, pulling her tight. He wasn't her boss. He wasn't her lover. He was her shield. His hand rested on her back, large and secure. She let out a breath she felt she'd been holding her entire life. For the first time, in a house full of killers, in the arms of the most dangerous man in Ravenwood, Elena Rosas felt safe. She fell asleep. He did not. He held her, staring into the darkness, and guarded her dreams. The nights were the most profound change. Sleeping in Luca's bed had become a strange, chaste ritual. After the night he had held her, the pretense of her separate room, her gilded cage, had simply dissolved. It was an unspoken, tactical decision, with the Albrini threat hanging over them. He wanted her within arm's reach. She would enter his room late, after hours of working alongside him in his office. He would already be in bed, propped against the headboard, reading, or just staring at the wall of security monitors he'd had installed opposite the bed. She would slip under the covers on her side, the space between them a gulf of clean, cold sheets. He would turn off the light and they would lie in the dark, 2 feet apart, breathing in the same charged air. Some nights they talked, quiet murmurs about the manifest she'd organized, or a passage in one of her nursing books. Other nights, they said nothing, but she would feel him shift, his body turning toward hers in the dark. It was an intimacy of proximity, of shared danger. It was deeper, more terrifying than any kiss in public during the day. She was invisible in a new way. She was no longer a maid. She was a ghost who haunted the West Wing, the staff from Mrs. Davies down to the groundskeepers, now looked at her with a new, sharp, formalized fear. She was not the boss's whore. She was the boss's something. Something to be protected. Something that, if crossed, could get you fired, or worse. Elena hated it, but she understood it. She kept her head down, her work in his office becoming her entire world. She managed his schedules. She managed his private medical supplies. She was good at it. Her precise, organized mind, the same one that memorized the branches of the nervous system, was perfectly suited to the brutal logistics of his organization. She was bridging her dream with his reality, and the line between them was becoming terrifyingly blurred. The reality of that world struck a week later. It was a Tuesday. Luca had been tense all morning, pacing the office, his phone pressed to his ear, his conversations in Italian clipped and harsh. A major transport was moving, a shipment of pharmaceuticals that Elena had spent the last 2 days logging. He left at noon, with Marco and 3 other guards. He just walked out, stopping only to look at her. "Stay in the room, lock the connecting door, do not open it for anyone." He returned at 4 p.m. She heard the commotion in the main hall, shouting, not angry but urgent. She was in the suite, and she ran to the connecting door, her hand on the knob. She obeyed. She waited. An hour later, the door to his bedroom opened. He walked in, not from the hall, but from his office. He must have come up the back stairs. He was not wounded, but his hands were dark with dried blood that was not his. His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage. "Luca," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Are you—" "It's not mine," he said, his voice flat. He walked to the bar in the corner of his room and poured a whiskey. His hand was perfectly steady. "The transport was hit. An ambush. The supplies?" He took a long, burning swallow. "The supplies are gone. The truck is gone." He set the glass down. "We lost a man. Dario. He had a wife. 2 kids. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. A man was dead. a man she had probably passed in the hall, a man whose name was on the payroll she had just reviewed. It was no longer a game of shadows. It was real. "How?" she whispered. "How did they know? That route. It was secure." "They knew," he said, his voice a blade. "They knew the exact time, the exact route, the exact truck. They were waiting." He turned and stalked into his office, leaving her alone in the bedroom. She knew what that meant. The Albrini hadn't just gotten lucky. Sophia's story, the story of betrayal, echoed in the silent room. He had a traitor, this time. She did not wait to be asked. She followed him. He was at his desk, his phone to his ear, his back to her, barking orders. "Find out who talked. I want a name. I want everyone who knew that road in a room. Now." Elena went to the side desk, her desk. She pulled out the manifests from the last 2 days. Her mind was sharp, clinical. She was not his lover. She was not his prisoner. She was the only one he could trust. She worked for hours, her pen flying, cross-referencing the driver logs, the security rosters, the route authorizations. Luca paced, his fury a tangible thing, a low-grade hum in the air. At 10 p.m., she found it. "Luca?" He stopped pacing. He turned to her. "Dario," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He wasn't supposed to be driving that truck." Luca was at her side in an instant, leaning over, his bloody hands braced on her desk. He stared at the logbook. "What?" The original driver was a man named Sante. He called in sick at 11:30 a.m. Dario was his replacement, a last-minute switch. "Who authorized the switch?" Luca's voice was lethal. Elena's finger traced the line to the bottom of the page, a neat, precise signature. "Vince," she whispered. Luca went rigid. It was as if she had struck him. "No. Luca, look at the timeline," she pressed, her clinical focus taking over. "The switch was at 11:30. The ambush was at 2 p.m. The Albrinis didn't just know the route. They knew the replacement driver. They knew the exact truck Dario would be in. "No," he repeated, louder this time. He straightened up, backing away from the desk, from the evidence. "Vince, no. He's been with me for 15 years. He was my father's right hand. He's my lieutenant. He's family. He's the only one who signed off," Elena said, standing. "He's the only one, other than you, who knew about the replacement. It's just like Sophia, someone you trust." "Do not," he snarled, his controls snapping. "Do not say her name. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a girl reading ledgers. You're not my advisor. You are wrong. Vince is loyal." He was shouting, not at her, but at the idea. He was terrified. He couldn't face another betrayal. He was in denial, a deep, violent denial that protected his image of the world. "Luca, please." "Enough," he roared. "You're done. Get to bed. Get out of my sight. I will handle this. Vince is loyal. Do you hear me?" She stared at him, her heart breaking. He was choosing to be blind. His loyalty was a flaw, a gaping wound that the Albrinis were pouring salt into. She turned, without another word, and left. She went to her room, the guest suite, not his bed. She locked the door. She was furious and she was terrified. He was wrong. She knew he was wrong. And if Vince was the traitor, he was inside. He was here. He knew she was here. He knew she was the one looking at the ledgers. She was the one who had found him out. She was a target, and Luca, in his blind loyalty, had just dismissed her. He would not protect her from this. He could not. She sat on the bed in the dark, her body shaking. The dead man, Dario. He was her. He was a replacement, a target. She thought of the men in the corner store. She thought of Sophia, bleeding on the marble floor. She would not die. She would not be a ghost. She made a decision. She stood up. She unlocked her door and slipped into the empty hallway. She did not go to Luca's room. She went down the main staircase, her feet silent on the thick runners. She went down, past the kitchen to the basement. She knew where it was. The supply closet she had organized was next to the armory. The door was heavy, steel, with a simple, high-security keypad. She had watched Marco open it once. 6 numbers. His code. She had seen it. His son's birthday. 081412. Her fingers were numb, trembling. She punched in the code. The lock clicked, a sound like a gunshot in the silent basement. She pulled the heavy door open. The room was cold. It smelled of gun oil and steel and something dry, like gunpowder. Racks of rifles lined one wall, but on the long, steel table in the center, handguns were laid out, neatly disassembled, waiting to be cleaned. She stepped inside. Her target was a simple, black, compact pistol, a Glock. It was the kind she saw tucked into the waistbands of all his guards. It looked smaller than the others. She picked it up. It was impossibly heavy, cold, hard, and real. It was a tool of his world, and it was in her hand. She didn't know how to use it. She didn't know if it was loaded. She fumbled with it, trying to find the thing, the safety. Her nursing textbook hadn't prepared her for this. "Put that down!" His voice was not a roar. It was a whisper, a blade of ice in the dark, and it was right behind her. Elena screamed, a short, terrified sound, and dropped the gun. It clattered loudly onto the steel table. She spun around. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of absolute, cold fury. This was not the man who held her. This was not the man who kissed her. This was the boss. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. I, she stammered, backing away until she hit the table. "I need to know how. I need to protect myself." "Protect yourself," he repeated, stepping into the room. "That's my job. That's what Marco is for. That is what these walls are for. Your job is to stay safe." "Like Dario," she shot back, her terror giving way to that same wild defiance he had seen before. "Like Sophia?" The name hit him like a physical blow. He stalked toward her, his hand raised. She flinched, but he didn't strike her. He slammed his palm on the table, inches from her hand, rattling the guns. "You will never be Sophia," he roared, his control shattering. "You don't get to be this. I am protecting you. I'm keeping you safe. You don't need to be like me." "Then stop," she screamed, the tears finally coming, hot and furious. "Stop making me a part of this. Stop making me like you, and then yelling at me for it." He froze, his face confused, the anger faltering. "What? You?" she cried, her fists clenched. "You pull me from the basement. You give me books. You bring me into your office. You have me organizing your medical supplies for your war. You have me reading your ledgers. You have me sleeping in your bed. You pull me into your world every single day, and then you yell at me when I try to learn how to survive in it." She was sobbing now, hitting his chest with her small, balled fists, a useless, pathetic gesture. "Stop making me feel like I belong in this world, while telling me I don't." Her words broke him, the rage, the denial, the cold fury. It all shattered, leaving only the raw, aching, desperate man beneath. He stared at her, seeing her. Really seeing her. She was right. He had dragged her into his life, and now he was angry that she was trying to live. "Elena!" He breathed. It was a surrender. He grabbed her wrists, stopping her frantic assault. He didn't pull her. He just held her, stilling her. He looked at her tear-streaked face, at the defiant, broken, beautiful woman in front of him. This was her choice. This was her yes. It was not a soft whisper in the dark. It was a furious scream in his armory. She was choosing to be here. She was choosing to fight. He dropped her wrists and his hands came up to frame her face. He crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of fire, of desperation, of a dam finally breaking. It was all the unsaid words, all the tension, all the fear and the want and the nights of lying 2 feet apart, starving. He kissed her fiercely, his mouth devouring hers, his stubble scratching her skin. She kissed him back, a sob breaking in her throat. Her arms went around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. This was it. This was the choice. He broke the kiss only to lift her. He swung her up into his arms, her legs wrapping around his waist. He didn't stop to close the armory door. He carried her, his strides long and urgent, up the basement stairs, through the silent kitchen, up the main staircase. He didn't care who saw. He carried her into his bedroom, kicking the door shut behind him. He didn't turn on the light. He crossed to the bed and fell onto it, pulling her with him. his mouth never leaving hers. "Luca," she breathed against his lips. "It's yours. Elena," he whispered, his voice ragged, his lips tracing a path to her jaw, her ear. It's always been yours." He undressed her, not with frantic, clumsy haste, but with a slow, deliberate, aching reverence. Each button on her simple shirt, the clasp of her jeans, he was unwrapping something priceless he had waited a lifetime to hold. His hands, the same hands that had been covered in blood hours before, were impossibly gentle, his calloused fingertips stroking her skin as he bared it. She undressed him, her hands trembling, but sure. She fumbled with his belt buckle. She pulled his shirt from his shoulders, her palms gliding over the hot, hard muscle of his chest, his shoulders. She felt the raised, puckered scar on his side, and she kissed it. A sound tore from his throat, a sound of agony and release. He rolled, pressing her deep into the mattress, his skin against hers. This was not a taking. It was a joining. It was a collision. Their bodies finally moved together, a slow, aching, urgent rhythm that was both a discovery and a homecoming. He watched her face in the moonlight, his eyes dark and open, letting her see all of him. The monster, the protector, the broken man who was terrified of losing her. And she trusted him, in this house, in this world. She trusted this man. She met his gaze, her hands on his face, and she did not look away. He moved, and she moved with him. A perfect, silent, breathless conversation. It was a claiming, and it was a total surrender. For both of them. After, they lay tangled, their bodies damp, their breathing slowing in unison. He didn't pull away. He didn't roll over. He pulled her flush against his side, his arm a heavy, possessive weight over her waist, his face buried in her hair. She fell asleep almost instantly, a deep, boneless, trusting sleep. She was not a prisoner. She was not a maid. She was safe. Luca Moretti did not sleep. He held her, breathing in her scent, his arm locked around her. He stared at the ceiling, at the shadows cast by the moon. The war with the Albrinis, the war with his past, was a storm on the horizon. But now, he knew what he was fighting for. He had a traitor in his house, and he had the only thing he had ever truly wanted in his arms. War was here, and he was ready. The night in the armory had shattered the last wall between them. The intimacy that followed was not just a physical act, it was a shift in power. When they returned to his room, tangled and breathing in the scent of gun oil and each other, Luca had finally looked at her, not as a ward, not as a project, but as an equal, a partner. The next morning, he had apologized, not for the passion, but for the blindness. "You were right," he said, his voice rough as he watched her organize her textbooks on the desk in his office, a desk that was now permanently hers. "About Vince." "I know," she said, her voice quiet. She did not need to gloat. "My loyalty. It's a flaw. I see what I want to see. You see what's there." He had given her more than just a place in his bed. He gave her access, a new security fob that opened his office, the library, and the server room. He told her it was for her safety, so she could move freely in the secure West Wing, but they both knew what it was. He was trusting her eyes. Elena, in turn, did not rest. She was now driven by a new, fierce purpose. She was no longer just protecting her own life. She was protecting his. His blindness to Vince had almost cost them a man. Dario. She would not let it happen again. While she worked on her nursing modules at her desk, she kept a small, secondary security monitor on. She was supposed to be logging his shipping manifests, but she was watching his people. She learned the guards' routines, their habits, and she watched Vince, the lieutenant, sensing his boss's sudden coldness, had become quiet, reserved. But Elena saw him. She saw the way he avoided Luca's gaze. She saw the way he always took his phone calls outside, and she saw him talking to Sal. Sal was a junior guard, ambitious, with a gaze that was just a little too shifty. He was always trying to get closer to the center of power. Twice in 1 week, Elena saw Vince and Sal in a chance encounter in the driveway, heads bowed, their conversation lasting only seconds. It was enough. The opportunity came a week after the failed ambush. Luca was gone. A mandatory meeting across town with the heads of the other families. A meeting to project strength after his perceived weakness. "I'll be back by midnight," he'd said. Kissing her. It was a hard, possessive kiss, a promise. "Marco is on the terrace. You're safe here. Lock the bedroom door." She had locked it, but she was in his office, working and watching. At 10 p.m., she saw it. Sal. He was supposed to be on the east perimeter. The monitor showed him slipping into the west wing through a service corridor. He was coming this way. Elena's blood ran cold. She was alone. Marco was outside, on the terrace, 2 floors down. She was the only one in the office. She heard the soft beep, beep, boop of the keypad on the main office door, the one in the hall. The door opened. Sal stepped in. He had a code he should not have. He didn't see her. Her desk lamp was off, and she was a shadow at her side desk. He moved with a snake-like confidence, straight to Luca's main desk. He knelt, pulling a small, black USB drive from his pocket. He plugged it into the main server tower hidden in the knee hole. The small drive blinked. A tiny, malevolent red light. He was copying everything. Vince's backup plan. Elena didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her mind, the one trained to assess a patient, to remain calm, to follow procedure, clicked into place. She knew the office. She knew its systems. Her hand slipped under her own desk, her fingers finding the small, round button recessed in the wood. It was a silent alarm. It didn't ring. It sent a high-priority alert directly to Marco's phone. And to Luca's. She pressed it. She held her breath, counting the seconds. 1,000, 2 1,000. Sal was focused, the monitor's light painting his face in a blue-white glow. 10 1,000. The wait was an eternity. She was unarmed. He was not. The connecting door to Luca's bedroom, the one Sal had ignored, burst open. "Hands, now!" Marco and 2 other guards were there, guns up, their movements a blur of lethal efficiency. Sal screamed, a high, terrified sound, and fell backward, his hands flying into the air. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" Elena stepped out of the shadows, her hand still shaking from pressing the button. Marco looked at her. His face, usually a mask of stone, was filled with a new, profound respect. He looked at Sal, at the blinking drive, and understood. "She caught him," Marco said, his voice flat. Sal was on the floor, weeping. When Lucas stormed in 10 minutes later, he had clearly broken every speed limit in the state. His face was pale, his hair wild. He saw Sal on the floor, the guards, and then he saw Elena, standing pale but unharmed by her desk. Luca was breathless. "Copying your server, boss," Marco said, holding up the USB drive with 2 fingers. "Vince's man." Luca's gaze locked on Elena. The denial he'd held on to, the stubborn belief in his lieutenant. It all crumbled. She had been right. He'd been a fool. His loyalty had almost cost him everything. He turned to Sal. His voice was a whisper, colder than any shout. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Sal sobbed. He just gave me the drive. He said if I got the files, he'd get me out. He's with the Albrinas. He set up the ambush. He set it all up. He gave them everything." Luca nodded once, a sharp, final movement. "Take him downstairs. Find out what else he knows. Then get rid of him." The guards hauled the man away. The office was suddenly, violently silent. Luca stood in the middle of the room. He looked at the server, at his desk, at the woman who had just saved his entire operation. "He's gone," Luca said, his voice hollow. "Vince, he must have known when Sal didn't check in. He's in the wind. He's with them." He looked at Elena, his eyes dark with a shame and an awe so deep it was painful. "You were right." "I know," she said, her voice soft. She went to him, her hand finding his. "Now you know the threat. Now you can fight it." He gripped her hand like a lifeline. He gave them everything, the codes, the layout, our defenses. He looked at her, a new, cold terror in his eyes. "They're not going to try to breach the gate, Elena. They know how to get in. They're coming for you." The attack came not with a whisper, but with an explosion. 3 nights later, the world ended. A massive boom from the main road, a flash of blue-white light, and the entire estate was plunged into a blackness so total it felt like velvet. The transformer. The main power was cut. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. "Down," Luca roared. He was already out of bed, a gun in his hand. Then the backup generators kicked in. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in a dim, apocalyptic red. And with the lights came the sound. Heavy, automatic gunfire from the main gate. A full-on assault. "It's a diversion," Luca snarled, moving to the bedroom door, his phone already to his ear. "Marco, the gate is a diversion. They're coming from the back. Lock down the west." He never finished. The massive, reinforced glass window of the terrace, the one he thought was impenetrable, shattered inward in a cascade of glass. 2 men, clad in black tactical gear, rolled in, weapons raised. Luca fired, 1 man dropped, the other was on him, using his rifle as a club. He slammed the butt of it into Luca's temple. Luca staggered, firing wildly, but he was stunned, dropping to 1 knee. "Grab the girl!" the man shouted. Elena screamed. She had been huddled by the bed, just as he'd told her. She scrambled away, but the man was too fast. He lunged, grabbing a fistful of her hair, and clamped a thick, gloved hand over her mouth. She was light. He hauled her off her feet and threw her over his shoulder. "Luca!" she screamed, her voice muffled, her hands beating against the man's back. "Elena!" she heard him roar. A sound of pure, animalistic rage. She heard a gunshot, the thwack of a bullet hitting the man holding her. He grunted, but he didn't stop. He was wearing a vest. He plunged back through the shattered window, carrying her. It was a blur of cold night air, shouting, and the smell of cordite. She was thrown into the back of a van, a heavy, stifling bag pulled over her head. The door slammed, the van tore off. Tires screaming on the gravel, crashing through what sounded like a wooden fence. She was gone. The entire, horrific kidnapping had taken less than 90 seconds. Back in the room, Luca was on his feet, blood streaming from the cut on his head. He was not a man. He was an animal. He was a force of pure, distilled rage. "They have her!" he roared into his phone, his voice breaking. "They have Elena! All cars. They're in a black van. They breached the south fence. They are moving south. Find her. Find her now." Marco met him at the front door, his arm in a sling from a stray bullet at the gate. "Boss, wait for backup. Let us handle—" "Get in the car," Luca growled. "You're driving." He didn't wait. He personally led the charge, his black sedan tearing through the night. He was tracking her. A small, simple GPS chip he had sewn into the lining of her coat 3 weeks ago. "They're not running," he snarled, his eyes locked on the glowing red dot on his phone's screen. "They're not dumping her. They're taking her to the old shipyard, Vince's old territory, the Albrini warehouse." He didn't wait for the rest of his men. He and Marco arrived first, screeching to a halt in the gravel. "Boss, we need a plan," Marco said, checking his weapon. "I am the plan," Luca said. He kicked the side door of the warehouse off its hinges. It was a vast, dark, cavernous space, lit by a few, bare, swinging bulbs. In the center, tied to a steel chair, was Elena. She was terrified, but she was not crying. Old man Albrini was there, a snake in a tailored suit, and beside him, his face a mask of smug triumph, was Vince. "It's over, Luca," Vince sneered. "You see, your weakness, always the same. A girl, just like—" He never finished the name. Luca didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He raised his pistol and fired. Vince's smug expression vanished, replaced by a round, dark hole in his forehead. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Albrini screamed, pulling his own small gun, but Marco was already moving, putting 3 rounds in the man's chest. Elena watched it all, her eyes wide. She saw Luca move. He was not the man who held her, who kissed her, who read nursing textbooks. He was a shadow. He was a killer. He moved through the remaining 2 guards with a brutal, cold efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful. He was death itself, and he had come for her. It was over in seconds. The vast warehouse was silent, save for the echo of the last gunshot. Luca stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. He was covered in blood, Some his, some not. He looked at Elena, his eyes still wild, the animal still in control. He walked toward her, his gun still hot in his hand. He knelt, cutting the ropes from her wrists with a knife from his boot. His hands, the hands that had just dealt death, were shaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw, broken. She just shook her head, unable to speak. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, violent force of his protection. He didn't ask her to walk. He pulled her from the chair, swung her into his arms, and carried her. He carried her out of the warehouse, past the bodies of her captors, out into the night, just as the wail of sirens from his own backup descended on them. In the back of the sedan, he didn't let her go. He held her on his lap, his face buried in her hair, his entire body shaking with the adrenaline crash. He was a mess of blood, sweat, and tears. She reached up, her own hand trembling, and touched the bleeding cut on his temple. He flinched, his eyes still dark and haunted. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered. His gaze focused. The animal retreated. The man returned. He saw her. She was safe. He crushed her against his chest, a sound breaking from his throat, half sob, half groan. He just held her, the only clean thing in his entire God-forsaken world. The war was over. Albrini was dead. Vince was dead. The betrayal was purged. That night, back in their room, the broken window already boarded up. She watched him clean his wounds. She sat on the edge of the bed, wearing his shirt. He was standing in the bathroom, dabbing antiseptic on the gash on his head. "Will I always be yours?" she asked, her voice quiet. He stopped, his hand hovering. He looked at her reflection in the mirror. He saw her, small and pale in his massive bed, surrounded by the evidence of his violent life. He walked out of the bathroom and sat on the bed in front of her. He took her hands. They were so small. "You were never mine, Elena," he said, his voice thick. I never owned you. I possessed you. I locked you in. I trapped you. That wasn't for you. It was for me. It was for Sophia. It was selfish. Luca, you saved my life. I put your life in danger," he countered, his grip tightening. "No, you are free. I mean it. You can walk out that door right now. The war is over. You're safe. I'll give you enough money and, you can go anywhere. Start over. Get that apartment. Get the dog. Go be a nurse. You're free." She looked at him, at this terrifying, broken, powerful man who was offering her the one thing he had never, ever given anyone, an escape. She smiled, a slow, gentle, certain smile. "You will only be mine," he whispered, his eyes desperate. "If you still want me when you're free." She leaned forward. She didn't answer with words. She kissed him, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of antiseptic and safety and home. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured against his lips. "But I am going to school. You're right. I'm going to be a nurse." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed into the foyer. The house was quiet. The marble, once cold, felt warm. Elena came down the stairs, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing jeans, a thick, warm sweater, and a heavy coat. A backpack, heavy with textbooks, was slung over one shoulder. Luca was waiting at the bottom, holding a travel mug of coffee. He looked like a normal man, a husband. "You're sure you don't want Marco to drive you?" he asked, for the 10th time. "It's a private, accelerated program. Luca, it's at the university," she said, taking the coffee. "I'm taking the bus. It's perfectly safe. Besides, I like the walk." "I don't like it," he grumbled. "I know." She stood on her toes, her backpack thumping against his chest, and gave him a kiss. It was not a desperate, clinging kiss. It was a kiss of "see you tonight." It was easy. It was normal. "I'll see you for dinner. Don't let Maria burn the pasta." "Go," he said, his voice rough. "You'll be late." She smiled, the bright, brilliant smile that was just for him, and walked out the massive front door, into the sunlight. Luca did not move. He watched her go, then walked to the large floor-to-ceiling window beside the door. He watched her walk down the long, winding driveway, her step light, her head high. He watched until she passed through the new, reinforced steel gates and disappeared onto the public street. He rested his hand on the cold, clear glass, his gaze fixed on the empty spot where she had been. A slow, quiet smile, one of peace, touched his lips. She was no longer his maid. She was no longer his prisoner. She was quite simply his future. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so grateful to have you here with us. We would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of love and danger, and let us know what you thought of Luca and Elena's journey.